What's up, everyone? Jared Sandler here with you. Hope you're having a wonderful day or evening, wherever it is that you might be. And I appreciate you clicking on the link or at least getting this far and listening to the Just a Sec conversation. In episode 35, I chat with a buddy of mine who I've gotten to know as a teammate from a working standpoint over the last few years, and that's Bryan Broaddus. Now, I actually met Bryan the night I got arrested for the first and thankfully only time. I don't know that we talk about that story in this, but I'm happy to discuss it in future conversations. Bryan really wasn't a part of it. It just so happened that that was the particular day in which I met him. Now, I've gotten to know Bryan. He's worked in the media with 105.3 The Fan and a big part of the Dallas Cowboys coverage for the last few years and does a tremendous job, but he's not a journalist by trade. Bryan's a Super Bowl winning scout. He played football at LSU, coming out of the DFW Metroplex. He's been an integral part of various front offices and has so many awesome stories to tell because of it. And well, that's one reason why I wanted to chat with my buddy Bryan Broaddus. So here you go. Buckle up. Hope you enjoy episode 35 of the Just a Sec conversation with Bryan Broaddus. All right, Bryan, I always like to lead with this question. Take it in any direction you'd like. What was Bryan Broaddus like growing up?
He was a guy that really appreciated sports. He always wanted to be involved in sports. He always wanted to do things that were related to sports as far as, I wanted to be, like at 9 years old, I wanted to be a broadcaster. I really did. And I just loved watching sports. I loved listening to guys talk about sports. And so it was always unique for me to, as a kid, play sports, grow in sports, and then have the opportunity to do what I do today because as a kid, I always wanted to be involved with sports.
Do you recall what drew you to sports? Was there a person or a group of people who influenced that, or was that just something hardwired into you at birth?
My family had a career in college football at Texas A&M. My uncles played and then went on and played professional football for the 49ers. And that was kind of one of those things as a kid. I was always around football. My real first memory of sports was the 69 World Series with the Mets. And I couldn't figure out why they were celebrating, why they were jumping around on the field and stuff. And, that was kind of a unique thing to me. I thought, man, that's really cool. But, yeah, that was, it was just kind of that early – the family and then, the Mets that one time, the Cowboys in the Super Bowl against the Baltimore Colts, those were times where it really affected me, good and bad. With the Cowboys losing to the Colts, that was kind of strange. I never thought the Cowboys would ever lose, but they did. And so that was kind of a weird time in my life. But those are the types of things that drew me into sports.
And then specifically football, when did you develop a love for football that maybe separated from other sports? Or did you never really separate football from other sports? It just happened to be the path you went down.
It was really the path that I went down. Again, my family was so involved with sports as far as football. And so I was always, with my mom and dad as a kid, they were always going to games at Texas A&M. I was always wanting to go to the game. I was too young to go to the game. But, yeah, football was something that was always in me. And then, like in 72 when the Rangers came to Arlington, my mom and dad took me to games out there. I mean, I really enjoyed baseball that way in the early, with Ted Williams as a manager of the Rangers at the time and going to get his autograph. And it was ball night, bat night, and all this stuff like that. But football was kind of the path that I knew the most about, and I gravitated towards the most just because of my family. The other sports were more about, hey, let's go do this. I remember the Dallas Blackhawks had at the time, it was the minor league hockey team that played at Fair Park. Dad took me to hockey games as a kid. But it was always football. It was always football, the path, because that was something that we were doing every single weekend.
And then when did you? So you go and you go to LSU and you play football at LSU. At what point did you realize, like, hey, I'm pretty good at this football thing, and maybe this is something I can do when I graduate high school?
Well, that was, when I was a kid, like I say, the broadcasting part, I went to LSU with the intent of going and trying to get a broadcasting degree and seeing if I can, somehow do this. And, it really was funny that, it was just a really big time commitment for me, playing college football and then also trying to be in, the broadcasting, what I needed to do for that. And so, I changed my major and, had the opportunity while I was at LSU to kind of make a career switch. In the middle of it, I was going to school and, a couple of coaches there said, hey, you ought to get involved with coaching or recruiting is what you ought to do. And, if you're interested. And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds like a good path. It sounds like something I'm already involved with. And that's the decision. I went from being like thinking I was going to be the next Keith Jackson as a kid to being and going into college to being like, hey, maybe I could turn this into a career of being a coach on the collegiate level or pro level even, or even being a recruiter on the collegiate level. I had no intention of being a scout at all. That was something that I dealt with scouts every day at LSU, and it was, I had guys that were saying, hey, you get a pretty good gift for gab here and talking about these players. And, but I really never thought about it that much. But I did make like in my mind, a career change that going from wanting to be a broadcaster to being to wanting to work in, say, coaching or personnel.
So you mentioned, that they discussed maybe a gift for gab. What else do you recall did they see in you that led them to go out of their way to kind of share or project what they thought you were able to do in that regard? And what was it when they said that kind of clicked with you that was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. And I think I would love it for these reasons.
Yeah. The thing that I was never, I was a good high school player in Dallas at W.T. White. I was a good high school player. And then I went to LSU and I went from being a big fish in a little pond to being a little fish in a big pond. And I physically just was not talented enough to be a frontline Southeastern Conference football player in the 80s. I just, at the time, we were playing with, 285, 295 pound guys. I just never could get that big, and I just never could get strong enough. As hard as I tried, I just never could. And, I had to develop the ability to be a long snapper. I tried, for my scholarship and stuff to be able to develop a skill that, for them to keep me on scholarship and give me a reason to be around. But, sometimes, and I've learned this about, in talking with you and talking to people in baseball, sometimes the best players the best managers are players that weren't very good. Maybe they were bench players, maybe they were catchers, maybe they were backup players, that just were able to sit around and kind of evaluate the game. And, that's what I was always doing. I was always more than willing to listen. I was on scout teams the majority of my career at LSU. I was never, I traveled to all the games and sidelines, all the games and stuff, but, and as a deep snapper, but, never playing offensive snaps. But I always was willing to listen and learn and pay attention and take notes and, kind of be a guy that if, I had to explain something to one of my teammates, I was able to say, hey, listen, all right, this protection, this is what we're going to try and do here. This is why. And, that was something that, that path, when people explained it that way to me, I felt like, well, maybe they're right about this. Maybe I have the ability to teach, to explain, to coach. That kind of came pretty naturally to me because I was willing to, as really not a great player, I was able to willing to sit down and learn while the others were being great. And I think that right there, once I realized that I could do that, then that kind of steered me in the way that I went.
So I don't want to, at the risk of jumping ahead here, because I want to, after I ask this question, kind of get into your journey post LSU. But, whether it's pre-LSU, at LSU, after the fact, and your role as a scout and working for various NFL teams, who are some of the people who really ended up having a big impact on you and what you were able to accomplish and how you were able to grow?
Well, I was very appreciative of Pete Mangurian, who was my line coach at LSU at the time, in my last 2 years at LSU. And he's the one that really got me started as far as, hey, you would be pretty good at coaching because you understand this. You listen and the things I was just previously talking about. And he was a big influence in getting me involved that way. I really appreciate Mike Archer at the time, who soon became the head coach after Bill Arnsparger, giving me the opportunity to stay on staff and work and learn and do that. Appreciate R.C. Slocum at Texas A&M for also giving me the opportunity. Tim Cassidy, who currently is director of football operations at Arizona State, these are guys that said, "Hey, listen, you're just starting out. We enjoy visiting with you. You've got some really good thoughts for a young guy. You've been at a good organization at LSU. You've learned a lot there." And those are the guys that kind of got me started on the path of being involved with college athletics. And then, as I, did that for a couple of years, well, then other opportunities came along with some of the guys that I'd met that were NFL scouts and that were able to kind of steer me into the NFL where, I got an opportunity with NFL Europe the very first year in 1990. And so, that was a huge opportunity for me. It was all because of what I'd done at LSU and Texas A&M that I were able to get into professional football at the time, the World League, and really, as a young guy, get to see the world for free, but learn from some veteran NFL front office guys that were able to kind of direct me to the path I went in scouting.
Well, okay, so NFL Europe, what were your responsibilities there? And you mentioned that having such an impact. In what ways did that experience really impact you and maybe springboard into what would later become a career in the NFL domestically?
Yeah, that was something when I first started in 1990, the league was going, and I was with a guy named Dan Rambo, who currently does player personnel stuff up in the CFL, in the Canadian League. I worked with another man named Chet Franklin, who was a longtime NFL coach, with the Raiders under Al Davis, and then was a personnel man a number of years after that. Those were older guys that were, really kind of, hanging on in the league and stuff and getting an opportunity. But Chet Franklin, when I was involved with player personnel, I was at the Dallas office and handled the waiver wire, handled player transactions, handled, movement of the players, handled evaluation of the players, ran really our college scouting department at a very young age, in my early 20s. And, and that was a great experience for me to work with guys. Jerry Venisi at the time was running our football operations office in Dallas, and he was the architect of the '85 Bears. So I learned from some really veteran NFL guys, and it just happened that Chet Franklin, at the time said, "Listen, I'm going to get you a job at the right time in the NFL. When it's the right time, I'm going to get you a job." And I was in NFL Europe for 1 year, basically, getting ready for the second season, and Ron Wolf got the job with the Green Bay Packers in November of '91. And Chet had called Ron, and Ron was looking for a guy to coordinate his college scouting. And lo and behold, I went and interviewed with Ron on my started on my 27th birthday, interviewed on a Tuesday, was working with the Packers on Thursday on my 27th birthday. And so, that was a huge opportunity for me to, that these people thought enough of me, to push me along and then give me the opportunity to get into the NFL from there.
Okay, so you go to the Packers. It's with the Packers in which you win a Super Bowl. What were your initial responsibilities with the Packers, and maybe how did your responsibilities grow as you accrued more time with that organization?
Yeah, my job at the Packers was like the coordinator of college scouting. So what I was responsible for was I was not director of college scouting, but I oversaw like the information that came off the road from our scouts. We were very fortunate to have a group of guys that currently hold, positions as general managers today. Guys like John Snyder, was an intern of mine in Green Bay, and now he's a general manager with the Seahawks. And guys like John Dorsey, who ran an organization, he drafted Pat Mahomes, or helped in Kansas City draft Pat Mahomes. Scott McLuhan ran a team in Washington. He was a great. Tom Dimitroff was a guy, that I'd done a lot of work with. I mean, there were guys that I did a lot of work with as scouts that, their information would come in. I'd make sure it got into our system. Then I made sure when the time came for the draft that, all our tags were set, all our reports were in the computer at the time, all our film was there. So I did everything. The scouts were the guys that went on the road and collected the information. I took the collected information and made sure it got to our systems. And then when we evaluated for the draft, we started work, then I was responsible for having everything in order for us to put our boards together and things like that. So it was a great experience, not so much, I didn't get to do as much of the evaluation stuff my first couple of years because I was so busy trying to set things up for us. We had a great group of scouts. All those guys I mentioned, Sean Herrock was another one. I mean, we had guys that knew what they were doing out there on the road, and, they didn't need me out there. They needed me in the office, coordinating stuff. And so that's how I initially learned, how to get information and get it, it's set up so we can build boards and be able to draft in April when we needed to do that.
Okay, so I want to ask you about some of the unique characters you got to be around with the Packers. Before I do, we've referenced scouting a lot, and you essentially have assumed the identity as the media scout in the beginning of your media career, and now you're hosting with the G-Bag Nation, and that you've evolved into more than just a football scout. You're talking about all sorts of sports, but I think you always approach things, which I love listening to you, from almost like a scout's mentality. And so I guess I'm curious, this is such a general question. I hate to not be more specific, but how would you characterize the art of scouting, and what are some of the qualities necessary for a scout to be successful?
Well, I think the number one quality of a scout is that you have to trust what you see. And, I think the problem, Jared, nowadays with a lot of scouting departments is, and I'm talking to these guys that I was scouts with that are now running these teams, is, it's about training. It's about, you could train, I think you can train people to be scouts. I really, really do. I think, it helps to have an eye or an understanding. But, I go back to Scott McLuhan, who ran the Redskins and was with Seattle and plays. Scott's a very good scout, but Scott was a professional baseball player in the Toronto Blue Jays organization and, had really no scouting background. And, Ron Wolf brought him to Green Bay and then was able to train him. And I think that's really the most important thing is, you can have an eye, but you have to have the training. You have to be able to say, okay, these are the things that we're looking for in players. These are the things. Now, you're going to be right and you're going to be wrong. I mean, that goes to saying that's part of the territory. But, you have to be able to first off trust what you see. If you're trained the right way and you have, young scouts don't have a big Rolodex of players in their mind to be able to compare. And I think that's some of the things that, we bring up with what I do with 105.3 with like Jeff Kavanaugh and what I did with, Kevin Turner and guys like that when we were all working together is that, I was trying to train those guys. They had the natural eye for it. But now there's 6 years of doing this. So you've got a Rolodex in your head of players or an evaluation that you can compare players to. And I think that's really, really important, that experience of, being right about a player, but also being wrong about a player, because it makes you go and dig a little bit harder on a player. It's like, okay, this guy reminds me of this player, and that's going to be a positive, or this guy reminds me about this player and it's a negative. And those are the experiences that you have to have in order to be a really good scout. You have to just, you have those guys you hit on and you go forward with those guys and it's fine. It's the misses that make you tougher and make you more kind of, it focuses you more on what you need to do. Like I say, I don't think about the guys that I got right. I think about the guys that I missed. Those are the guys that have shaped me as a scout. And then now, working in the broadcasting side of it, I mean, it's not really the life or death like it was, per se, when working for a team. Now it's more about trying to paint a picture for my listener or my reader to be able to better understand these players. And I think that's something I've always tried to project.
Okay, so back to your time at Green Bay. You were there when Brett Favre was there. You were there when
Yes.
John Gruden was there. And those two guys are about as fun a characters as the NFL has had over certainly over my lifetime. What was it like getting to know and working with and being around those two individuals?
Well, I was an Uber driver for Brett Favre before there was Uber. Him and the quarterbacks at the time. We had Doug Peterson, who's the head coach with Philadelphia, and then a guy like Jim McMahon, who was a Super Bowl winning quarterback with the Bears. And, we had a group of guys that were really unique. And as far as they really had a good time, as you said. But, I was the guy that made sure that they got to and from where they needed to go, got the bar tab paid up, and then got them out of trouble when we were about to have trouble. So, that part of it was a lot of fun, just being around those guys. But, because they were a unique group. But Favre always had a way of never taking himself too seriously. And I think that's something that we could all learn from him, that, one of the great stories was about him not understanding what a nickel defense is, and he having to ask Ty Detmer, and Ty was basically like, "You're serious? You don't know?" And he goes, "No, I have no idea." And he was basically saying that, well, Ty told him, well, hey, they take a linebacker off and they put a defensive back on. And Favre looked at him and goes, "That's it? That's it? That's all it is?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's really what it is." And so, Brett never knew that. But Brett was really, really fortunate because he had guys that really, really appreciated him. Andy Reid appreciated him. Steve Mariucci appreciated him. Mike Holmgren, there was a time where Brett was throwing a ton of interceptions. And, and Mike and Steve basically said, "Hey, we're married to you. We're not, we had a chance to flip over and, play with Mark Brunell at quarterback." And Mike and Steve said, "Nah, this is our guy." And I think Brett always appreciated that. But Brett, number one, he made it easy to really like him, because he was such a fun-loving guy. And, he didn't know a whole heck of a lot. But he never acted like he knew a whole heck of a lot. He just was a great football player. And I think that's what people appreciated about him the most, the fact that he was such a good person that it made it easy to fall in love with him and be around him. And I enjoyed that. I wear a Super Bowl ring today because of him, and I'll always cherish that.
And when you see the John Gruden that we see today and maybe saw while he was a broadcaster versus the John Gruden you got to know, and I know you've got a ongoing friendship with him, but what would you like people to know about the John Gruden that you know versus the John Gruden that maybe people portray or project through what they see through the TV screen?
Yeah, John is a very, very passionate guy when it comes to his football. I mean, he what you see on TV is really John Gruden. And I remember John when John was a guy. It's well known that his alarm clock goes off at 3:17 in the morning, and John will tell you it's because he didn't know how to change the alarm clock. He just didn't know how to. He's like, I didn't know how to work it, so that's why it goes off. But John still is a very, very hard worker, and John at the time, it's funny, he was just a broke coach, and his wife Cindy, they just had their son, and John took his company car and left it for Cindy to drive, so John would walk to work, and walking to Green Bay in the dead of winter was never easy, and I'd go pick John up for work, and drive him to the facility and stuff like that so he wouldn't have to walk in the snow and things like that. And, but John always appreciated that. John worked really, really hard. The really good coordinators were guys that steal ideas from other coordinators. And John and Andy Reid and those guys were always working really hard at their craft to kind of come up with new creative ideas. Holmgren would always let them come up with a play or two that they could put in the game plan that week. And so that was really important to John as a young coach. And he coached, with Sterling Sharp and, and guys like that. I mean, he had some guys, he had some characters that he coached, but John got along with everybody. And really what you see on TV is really what John Gruden is. And that's the thing I think that's so unique about him. His dad was a longtime coach and scout. And so he's got a good eye for players, but he's very, very passionate about that. And he takes all that stuff very, very seriously.
Okay. I want to go ahead and discuss your time with the Eagles quickly. You were a part of a group that was responsible for the draft and the scouting, and you helped bring in one of the best draft hauls that maybe any team had that year and over several years. And when you look back at the guys the Eagles got in this particular draft, it's incredibly impressive. First of all, for those who aren't familiar at all with what we're talking about, who were some of those guys, and what was that process like?
Well, it was a unique part of Eagle. I was brought in by Ray Rhodes, at the time the head coach of the Eagles, and Ray and I had worked together in Green Bay, and so this is my opportunity to go and be an evaluator. At Green Bay, I was really more of an administrator and kind of developed some evaluation skills. So I go to Philadelphia, and it was a difficult time for myself and a guy named Mike Lombardi, who now is in the media aspects like me, and Mike had run a team and stuff. And we worked in with Ray bringing us in. There was a guy at the time in football operations named Dick Daniels who really didn't want me or Michael there. I mean, this was a very, very tough time. And, Michael and I went a whole year basically without ever talking to anybody in coaching. The coaches felt like, and the scouts felt like, that Michael and I were there to take Dick Daniels' job and to fire everybody. So that was a very, very difficult time. And Ray Rhodes was trying to say, no, these guys will help us. Just let them help us. They'll help us here. And, but still we were not accepted, and that was tough. I went from being, knowing the staff and, working with the staff in Green Bay to, not working at all with the Eagles guys. And that was tough. And even John Gruden was on that staff in Philadelphia, and, John tried to help us, and it just didn't work. I mean, it was tough. And then, lo and behold, Jeff Lurie, the owner of the team, comes and says, I'm making a change after the season. I'm making a change. I'm moving on from Dick Daniels. And, okay, so here now Michael and I are getting blamed for that because now Mr. Lurie is going to change out the, player personnel guys. Well, all of a sudden it's like all the scouts quit. I mean, there's like basically 3 scouts stayed and everybody quit. So it went from a scouting staff like, when I got the opportunity to run the department and run the draft, I lost 4 scouts just right off the jump. Boom. Don't want to be there anymore. So Mark Ross, who was a first-year scout, we see Mark's now on the NFL Network doing stuff. He was a general manager with the Giants, with the Giants, and then with the Buffalo Bills. Dan Shanka, Jake Holland were old veteran scouts that just stayed on, and it was us, them 3 and myself, that put together a board. And then I just actually pleaded with the coaches of, hey, I need you guys. If we're gonna do this the right way, I'm gonna need you. And to their credit, the guys came around. They said, okay, we understand what you're trying to do here, and we appreciate that. So initially, it was not really much. It wasn't very fun for me, And then the draft we pulled together. Michael made a great trade. He traded with Bill Parcells for Hugh Douglas, who was with the Jets, and, we gave up our 2nd-round pick. We took Trey Thomas in the 1st, Jeremiah Trotter in the 3rd, Brandon Whiting in the 4th. I mean, we Alan Ross, Ike Reese. We took some really good players, some players that fit in, to what we were trying to do, some really good role players, and Trey Thomas started a long time. Hugh Douglas had a great career with Philadelphia. And then Jeremiah Trotter, I had a doctor tell me, I don't know if he's going to play 10 games or 10 years because of a knee. And, I give Jeff Lurie a lot of credit. Jeff Lurie says, if we like this guy, let's take him. And we did. And he had a great career with the Eagles. And so, that was the draft that really set Andy Reid up. That was the draft. We had the draft. And then Michael and I didn't get a chance to even stay for that after that draft. They moved on. I went to Jacksonville. Michael went to work at, I believe it's CBS. And, we didn't even get to see it. But Andy Reid then came in as a coach and took that draft and then, added Donovan McNabb and some others, Bryant Westbrook and guys like that. And that was the draft that really propelled the Eagles to those back-to-back drafts propelled the Eagles to division champs for several years in a row. The roster, they did a great job, Andy did, of adding personnel. And I'd like to take credit for, helping Jeff Lurie hire Andy Reid. They had no idea who Andy Reid was, and I brought him up as a possible candidate for an offensive coordinator position because Gruden had left to go work with the Raiders. And I'm like, we need to go hire Andy Reid from Green Bay. And went on and on and on and on about Andy Reid. And lo and behold, after we left, they interviewed Andy Reid and they gave him the job. So, it was one of those things where it started off kind of rocky, and then it smoothed out because we did the draft. It worked out, and then but then we didn't get to see the final. I never got to experience the final benefit. Andy Reid benefited from that draft, and good for Andy because Andy was a good friend of mine.
Our final question I have for you, Broaddus, you made a decision at a point in your career where you essentially had to choose between, continuing a pursuit in the NFL or family. And I know it's tough enough to balance the two. I guess if you don't mind, without, you don't need to go into detail, but I can't imagine just talking to you, that wasn't really a hard decision for you. How was it for you prior to making that decision to essentially, choose to stay in Dallas and not travel the country and be there for your son, Bennett? Prior to that, how tough was it to balance football life and family life?
Well, yeah, Bennett was born 3 days after the 2004 draft. And I remember Bill Parcells looking at me and saying, "You're going to be here for this draft, aren't you?" And I said, "If my son is born on draft day, I will not be here." And he got all bent out of shape about that, and I didn't care. I really didn't care. And thankfully Bennett came after the draft, and that was kind of my decision that I made at that point in time. And then, my contract ran out in 2005 with the Cowboys, and and that was a decision that Jeff Ireland at the time was running, and he wanted to bring me back, but it came down to me and a guy named Brian Gain. And if Brian had taken the San Francisco job, I would have still been working in Dallas. But Brian said, "No, I'm going to come work in Dallas." And, and so I was out of a job. And, but I had to make a decision right then and there that, do I want to go on the road? I'd had some other guys around the league that were interested in bringing me on. But, I had to make a decision. At the time, my wife, she was, involved with the mediator, she was a mediator, and she did things, she was traveling the country, and she was doing quite well. She was very successful at it. But, we had to make a decision. Do we need, I needed to be here for him, while she traveled and really made a living for our family at the time until I could kind of find something that worked out for everybody. And, that part of it was difficult because I wanted to, I still wanted to scout, but I wanted also to help my family. It was important to me because of Bennett and her and the job that she had, that we make sure that he's taken care of first. And that's what it's always been, and he's now 2 years, 2 more years of high school, and then he'll be in college. And if I want to go do something else in my life, well, then I'll be free to go do something else in my life. But I've been really fortunate to, that's when I made the decision and got the opportunity to be involved with the media. After that, 05, 06, and 07, then that's what shaped my opportunity to be involved with media. And it's been something that's been great. I had a nice run as a scout, but I felt like I've had a pretty good run as a media guy now too. So I've been real fortunate to have two different careers. With some people have just one career. I've had a couple of different careers, and that aspect of it has been a lot of fun.